Alright, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to gauges, I guess, for American Truck Simulator. So no drive today, but we will be taking a look at what I've set up for my gauges. I will have timestamps down below in the description because this is going to be kind of a comprehensive look at the gauges. I'm not going to be wiring them. They're already wired. You can see that tangled mess. For some of you, that's a problem. It's not a problem for me because where the camera is angled, this is going to be the lid on the dashboard, and you're not going to see any of this stuff. And I know exactly how everything's organized. It looks like a mess, but it's perfectly organized for me. Yeah, so while I won't be doing any of the wiring, I will be going over the following things. What boards am I using? What kind of gauges am I using? What to look for when buying gauges? Which ones are going to work? Which ones aren't? There are a couple different ways to use these gauges. That's why I have two different boards that I'll show you. I'm going to go over just some of the hardware that you're going to need, and I'll give you a little wiring diagram too to help illustrate it. Some of you see better if I just show you things like this, and some of you need to see it laid out in a more clean format. And I've done that as best I can in Photoshop. So I will show you that little wiring diagram. I'll also show you some of the software that you can use to calibrate these. And so yeah, it's pretty comprehensive video. You guys have been asking for it, so we'll go ahead and get into it. Again, timestamps down below. If there's something that you don't need me to cover for you because you already know it, you can go ahead and skip ahead, because there are different, lots of different categories for what we're going to be doing today. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we see this tangled mess. The first thing that I want to bring to your attention is the board that I'm using. This is from SimProjects, as you can see there, simprojects.com. I have two different boards from SimProjects. This one is the Pro Gauge board. It is the one that I'm using for the most part. There is this other board buried down below, and the reason really why it's in its spot and it's hard to kind of pull out is because this one is the X27. It is meant specifically with this proprietary cable. On the other end of the cable, it's going into this gauge, which I'll talk a little bit more about, and into one of their proprietary stepper motors. The cable is only about that long, as you can see. So I pretty much have to have the board right up against the gauge. That's part of the reason why all of this is a cluttered mess. So if you are not using SimProjects, that's not a problem. A lot of people are using an Arduino to wire everything up, and that's perfectly fine if you have the experience. Just keep in mind, if you're using an Arduino, it also requires coding. And there are templates and things that you can download. But if you want to tweak things to your specific build, then you're probably going to want to be more than just a beginner or working with Arduino interface in the coding for the first time, unless you're just really adventurous. Personally, for me, I had some issues, as I'll talk about, with the wiring, and I didn't want to have to worry about coding at the same time. The errors that I made were purely wiring. So I just took the whole coding out of it. So that's why I'm using these two boards. Again, this is the Pro Gauge board from SimProjects, and this is meant really just to plug all of your wires into, and it's specifically for gauges that have a signal wire. Most of the time they're green, sometimes they're blue. This one is just for the stepper motors when you cannot find a gauge like this speedometer that has a signal wire. All right, so let's go in and take a look a little bit more at this Pro Gauge board. So we're on simprojects.com, 6690 pounds, or 66 pounds 90, I guess is how they say that. Probably just made a whole bunch of British people blush. Anyway, yeah, so this is the Pro Gauge board. You can get it with a power supply or without, and you can get it either with whatever plug, EU, UK, or the US. It's just another $4 or 4 pounds, roughly. You can also get it with the USB cable, or if you already have one, it's basically like a USB printer cable, as I can show you right here. Yeah, It's basically just like a printer cable. Something to note, and something that's really good about this board, is you're able to easily power your gauges and power your backlights. I have 8 gauges here, so I've got 3 over here, 4, 5, and I have 3 more that are kind of off screen. You can see them a little bit. There's one. These are all the small ones. There's another one right there. And there's another one. I'm kind of reaching over my steering wheel because I didn't want to pull my steering wheel off. Yeah, this is my Logitech steering wheel right here. So my monitor is usually right over there. But I felt like this view was going to be really good for you to see all the gauges and stuff. You've got a bunch of different things here. And this is really cool. If you don't know how this board works, it's pretty simple. You unscrew from right here. You get something to point it out. The screws are up here on top. You simply unscrew it, strip the wire, put the wire in, and screw it back down. And that's how it works for all of these across the board. And what we start with over here is this is your power. So you actually have 2 lines that are going to come in here. I only have one because I've actually spliced them together. I'll show you how to do that. But this is the power to the gauge as well as power to the backlight. The second one here is for your ground. Then after that, you have the signal wire for your speedometer, which I don't have plugged in because I had to do mine with its own stepper motor and the X27 board. Then you have the tachometer, and then you have 6 other gauges, all with green signal wires here. So basically what you want to do when you are looking at gauges, you want to make sure that you can find a gauge that has, and if you look at some of these, like these may be different colors. For the most part, red is power, yellow is light, backlight, black is ground, and then usually green will be signal. This one's a little bit different. The blue one here is actually your ground for this particular gauge, and all the gauges should come with this documentation. But you're looking for something that has 4 different lines on it, and specifically one that says signal. This one is going to be my signal. No, this one is going to be my ground. This black one is actually my signal. The red one is power, and this orange one over here is the backlight power. So make sure that let me show you, let me go ahead and put this up here. So here's one of the gauges that I was looking at. It's an oil pressure gauge. It doesn't specifically say electronic on it, but please look for gauges that say that they are electronic. Or at the very least, if you see one that says mechanical, like up here, that one's going to be harder. I could not find an air pressure gauge that was not mechanical, so I got this one. I'm going to have to tear it apart, put in the stepper motor, and use the X27 board. It takes a long time, and you probably cut yourself. Or at least I did a couple times when I did this speedometer. Let's go ahead and take a look. When you're going through, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to choose, why I was looking through Amazon. Not only is this what I've found to be the biggest selection of electronic gauges, they also have tons of information. And this is kind of the key right here that you want to look for. You want to be looking for something, here it is, that shows this sort of diagram. Those are the 4 wires that we are looking for. We're looking for the red positive, the black is the ground, the yellow is going to control your backlighting, and the green will be your sensor. That's what is happening with this board here. This whole board, all of these sensor, the game is connected through USB, sending information to your board, and the board is then, through the configuration software, sending signal down these signal wires to your gauges. So you need to have a sensor wire. That is why we're really looking at the green sensor wire. If you do not have that sensor wire, then you're going to have to use the stepper motor. And basically this is what I did. You see, these are the exact same brand. One of them still has this on it, and the reason is because this blue wire is a signal wire. So it's just done. I just plug it right into here. Red for the power, yellow for the backlight power, black for the ground, and then I just plug blue goes to this one right here for the signal, and it's one and done. This one didn't have that though. Modern speedometers that you're going to see, aftermarket speedometers, the vast majority of them that I've found run using GPS. So what they do is they'll give you the power, they'll give you the line for the backlight power, they'll give you the ground, but then that's all you have. You can see right here, there's 3 wires, black, red, and yellow. And then what you do is there's this little port here on the back, this gold one, and it basically hooks up via coaxial cable and runs to a GPS receiver that you put like on your dashboard or something. That isn't going to help you in a simulator because you're not moving. I even tried using that coaxial cable to plug into this board, and it got really hot and nothing transmitted, and I kind of cut my losses and figured this isn't going to go too well. I need to find another way. So what I ended up doing was I had to figure out how to take this black ring off, right? These are the same brand, these two. I had to pry, because it's bent over, tucked under, and I had to pry this off. Once that was off, I pulled the needle, pulled this top thing. I had to pull screws off of a processor, and the stepper motor is way down here in the bottom. And then I had to pry the stepper motor off. I had to put my own stepper motor, which I got from Sim Projects, and it has this tiny, short little cable running out of it, this little ribbon cable running to the X27. So it can be done, but it is a pain in the butt. Right now I have 8 gauges, 6 of them work. And, or is that right? Yes, 6 of them work. This one I finally got working by using the X27 board. I have this one. This one does not work, but I know it will work with the game. It is an air pressure, so brake air pressure. The game does transmit it, and it is one of the approved items on the list with the Pro Gauge. But I am, in fact, going to have to turn and use it with the X27 because this air brake pressure is, like I showed you here on Amazon, this was the gauge that is mechanical. Couple little bits of warning here when looking for gauges. You want to make sure that for the board that you're using, whether it's the Pro Gauge or whether you're using the X27 board, you want to make sure that the gauge that you're getting is something that is supported by that board. In addition, and here's where I made the mistake, this is why I have only 6 of 8, right? I just told you the brake air pressure is compliant with the software, it's compliant with the game. I just haven't hooked it up because I haven't had the time to tear it apart, or the patience to tear it apart. The other gauge that I got, this one right here, let me show you. This one right here, this is a fuel pressure gauge. And it has the 4 wires, as you can see there on the back. It's got the red, the yellow, the green, and the black. There are the 4 cables. It hooks up just fine. The problem is, when I was going through and I was looking at the Pro Gauge board, it said here, fuel pressure is one of the things that it accepts. So, like, one of the things that it doesn't accept, for example, is voltage. You can't get that on the X27. You can't get that on the Pro Gauge. It just doesn't deal with volts. Fuel pressure is one of the things that it can do, but don't just look at the prerequisites of what the board can do. You also have to look at what the game outputs. And I had everything hooked up, and I had it calibrated, and I could not get this fuel pressure gauge to the needle to move. I could get it to move when I calibrated it, and I'll show you the calibration in just a second. But the reason why it wasn't moving was the game, American Truck Simulator, does not deal with fuel pressure. Fuel pressure isn't a thing that it outputs, so there's no data to send it to this gauge to get it to move. So this is pretty much a dead gauge. I bought it. It's too late to return it. I'm just kind of stuck with it. It lights up just fine, and it makes it look like I have all 8 gauges, but it's not working. Once I do get this air brake pressure hooked up, this other one, then I'll have 7 out of 8 gauges working. But keep that in mind when you're looking for gauges. Most important, if you can, get electronic. If you can't, some mechanical ones will work, but it's going to take time, and you're going to have to take things apart, and you're going to have to use this extra X27 board, and it's going to have this short ribbon cable, and it's going to screw a lot of things up and take a lot of time. Always try to get something with a signal wire. Also, make sure that for the gauge that you're getting, if you're using this Sim Projects board, this Pro Gauge, or the X27, make sure it's one of the supported ones. Third thing, make sure the game actually outputs that data. If it doesn't, like this fuel pressure gauge, no data will be sent, even though I've hooked it up correctly, even though it's compatible with the board. I'm trying to save you some time. That was a mistake that I made. Kind of embarrassed, but I do want to point it out so that you guys don't make that mistake moving forward. All right, so you basically have an idea of the boards that I'm using. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at just one more example. Here's an oil temp gauge from Syncotech. And this one doesn't actually have any sort of mapping on it. It did have instructions inside, but that's the problem. If you go to look at a lot of sites, they'll have like one picture of the gauge, like particularly sites that sell real gauges for actual working trucks. You won't see diagrams as pictures, but at least you can zoom in and you can say, looks like you've got a red wire, a black wire, and a green wire, and then you can kind of see in the background that I think it's in another angle that there's also a yellow cable. So you've got the power, you've got the ground, you've got the power to the backlight and the signal wire. But yeah, this is another example of a gauge that will work. One more example. Did I show you the oil temp? I can't remember which one I showed you, oil temp or oil pressure. But these are basically, it's like they're almost from the same company. So this one, yeah, also Syncotech. And I had already tried this one out, so I knew that Syncotech was going to work. And all you need to do is find that picture that shows all the different color wires, and you're pretty good. Rather than having to rely on, this extra part here, that blue wire, that's just something for an actual vehicle. You don't have to worry about that. So those are the boards that I'm working with. Those are the gauges that I'm working with. I gave you a few tips on what to look for, what not to look for. While I'm not going to be wiring all of this up, I am going to show you and give you a basic idea, because I did already show you how these wires actually go into this Pro Gauge board here. But I wanted to show you something that's pretty cool when you go to wire all of your gauges together. And let's get to that now. Over here on my side table here, I have an example of a gauge that didn't work for me. It actually ended up working fine. I made a mistake with it. This is a fuel gauge. The one reason why I still ended up replacing it is because all of my other gauges, they have like 7 or 8 different color backlights. And this one I wasn't paying attention to, but this one only has red. And obviously for my channel, all of my lights are going to be green. So that was kind of a no-go. But and it's too late to return it. If anyone wants a fuel gauge, hit me up. But I kind of want to walk you through some of the ways that I hook all of this stuff up, and this is also going to lead to the wiring diagram that I'm going to show you. So the first thing that I really want to show you, and this gauge, it's a little bit different. This one is red is power, and actually says right here, so you can kind of read along with me. Actually, if I see if I can zoom in. Boom, there you go. So red is your power, blue instead of black is your ground, black is the signal, and orange is your backlight. So when it comes to wiring these things, this is what I've been using. We'll zoom in again for these so you can see the brand on it. The brand on it is Wago. I actually found this brand off of it was a stream, from Full Tilt Gaming, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, when he was putting all of his gauges together, and he said, man, you guys have to get these things. They're a time saver, and they are really great. Basically what you do, and they come in 5 bays like this, they come in 3 bays, they come in 2. So basically what you want to do, the simplest way is, if you want to splice wires together, pick the lid up, put one wire in, close it, put another wire in, close it, and those 2 wires are now spliced together. That's it. I'm probably actually going to leave it in this final configuration because I'm not dealing with a real vehicle. I'm not worried about waterproof or anything like that. I'm in an office right now. I'm in a room inside. I'm not going anywhere. But even if you were going to go the route of soldering, this is a quick way to know whether your wiring is working. And if it doesn't, oh, man, I wired that wrong. Oh, hold on. Let me just pull this little clip up here. I'll pull out the wire. Oh, that's the problem. It was the wrong wire. Now let me go ahead and put this wire in. Oop. Slipping on the wire. That wire in. Boom. 5 seconds. Or 10 seconds if you drop the wire. But easy way to splice 2 wires together, and it's not permanent. If you make a mistake, that's fine. If you want to replace the wires, if you want to take out the gauge entirely, you've just removed that part from the system, and you don't have to worry about redoing the entire thing. You don't have to worry about removing the solder or anything like that. Great for testing, great for beginners, and this is the first time I'm putting this stuff together, so it's absolutely perfect for me. Okay, so when it comes to actually hooking these things up, how are we going to do it? Now, basically what I'm doing is I'm starting out with these 5 bays. Now imagine this. I have 4 gauges over here and 4 gauges over here, right? 8 gauges total. So I already know that I think black was my signal, right? Yeah, black is my signal wire. Black is going to go straight into the pro gauge, right? It's going to go straight into one of these ports along here that are mostly green wires. That's the easy part. Now we have to wire all of our gauges together. And some people, what they end up doing for all of their gauges is they end up kind of daisy chaining them and using jumper wires to go from one gauge to the other. And I've seen that approach done. I took a little bit different approach, and from what I can understand, this is just a little bit better suited for me, and it may also be a solution for those of you who oftentimes end up running your backlight off of a separate 12-volt source. And the reason is when you daisy chain them, you're essentially putting all of your power for your gauges, all the power for your backlights all on one circuit. It's all reliant on the other. And if you hook them up in parallel so that they're more directly connected to the main power source, every gauge is, then you actually end up creating, let's say 8 gauges, you end up creating 8 different circuits, and it's able to manage the power. Now keep in mind, for the Pro Gauge board, you don't always have that problem because you have the USB to communicate information, but you have a separate power source here. This is, for me in the US, this is 110 power. I plug it into the wall. Whether you're 120 or you're 220, depending on where you are. So I'm not really too worried about that, but this seems like a really good way to organize everything. So what I've been doing is I took my 8 gauges, 4 over here, 4 over there, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this 5 bay. So I'm not going to wire all these gauges together, but just for an example. So I'm going to go ahead and take this red gauge here, and this red gauge is for power. So I'm going to say this 5 bay thing is going to contain nothing but power cables. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this bay here, and I'm going to insert the wire. Something to note, you do have to strip the wire quite a bit. Why is that? The reason is, and let me turn this upside down so you can see, you have to get the wire, this is where you insert it, and the wire has to go, it's really cool that it's clear, you can see, the wire has to go all the way to the end of it. So it has to fit that whole thing, but also there's a metal strip across here. And where that metal strip is still has to hit the wire. So you don't want to hit like the sheathing of it. That's no contact. So you can see how far this is. That is exactly why I have so much of the wire stripped. If you look at it, if it goes all the way to the back, there's still a point about right here on the wire where that middle bridge is contacting it, and that's what you need. I'm going to go ahead and insert it, and I'm going to have it upside down here so you can see. Boom. You can see how it hits the end. You can see how you can still see the metal wire right in here, right in this portion. If I move my thumb, it's in place, and I close it, and I'm good. Now what I would do is I would take my 3 other gauges on this side, because I've separated them into the left and right, and I would put the power for the 2nd gauge, power for the 3rd gauge, power for the 4th gauge. Now this is a 5 bay, so I would take the 5th one, and I would get a spare wire. I would just a random piece of wire, and it does help to have some extra wire. I am using 20 gauge wire, which is pretty much universal on all these gauges. And then you would take just a scrap piece of wire, you would plug it into there exactly how you would, clamp it down, and now you have a lead. And this lead wire is essentially going to be, if you run it backwards from your power source, that one cable is going to come into here, and it's going to shoot power to this gauge and this gauge and this gauge and this gauge all at one time. But it's going to mean that they're all on separate circuits. So that's what you need, and that covers your power cable. You also want to do the same thing for, let me see here. You want to do the same thing. In this case, the blue is your ground. Do the same thing. So you're going to go, and let me take a second one of these. And let's say you want to run all your grounds now. So let me go ahead, put that in. I'll flip it over so you can see that it's perfectly nested in there and in focus. I'll clamp it, and I'll take my other 4 gauges, or my other 3 gauges, boom, put them in here, and then that final one will be my lead again. So essentially what we're doing is I've got 4 on the left and 4 on the right. I've got all of my power run. And then on the right-hand side over here, I'm going to have 4 other ones. There's going to be 1 lead off of here and 1 lead off of the one on the other side. Those 2 are going to come together, and I'm going to use a 3-bay. I'm going to take 1 lead. Oop, sometimes these are hard to get open. They're very secure, though. Take your lead from the one on the left, put it in. The lead from your right, put it in, and it doesn't matter the order. And then you have another lead. So you've combined 5 wires into one, taken your 2 single cables, and you're now combining those into one. And you'll have 1 cable that is running the power for all 8 gauges. If that sounds a little bit confusing, I'm going to go to the wiring diagram right now and show you. This is the Pro Gauge board. So just to be clear, the way that I am having this set up is kind of like this. That's the orientation where it's a top down, and at the very top here, you're going to have your power, ground, and then all of your signal wires. All right, back to so that's your board from the top down. And essentially what we're going to do, as I go ahead and zoom out here a bit and fill the screen, need to zoom out to, probably about 100. 100's going to be okay. I'll center it. And I have my 8 gauges. So this would be my tach. This is my speedometer. This is my random 3 gauges over here, random 3 gauges over here, right? So if I divide it right down the middle, I have 4 gauges here. And that's exactly what I did when I showed you how to work with these Wago clips. Let me show you using the, I think I used the backlight. Keep in mind here with this Pro Gauge board, this top one is handling your power to your gauge and power to your backlights. So in the end, it's going to end up taking 2 wires, or you can do one. I'll show you how to do that as well. But here's the diagram for how to hook these up. Each one of these rectangles is one of those Wago clips that I was showing you how to put the wire into and clamp them. The number represents how many bays. Remember, I was showing you the first one. If you want to connect 4 gauges, well, here's gauge 1. It's going into it. Here's gauge 2, gauge 3, and gauge 4. And this dotted one is your outgoing. That's your lead now. Once you connect that to power, it's going to run and power all 4 of those gauges. Well, I did that over here too. Gauge number 1, gauge number 2, gauge number 3, gauge number 4. They're all running into this 5-bay Wago thing, the Wago clip. The dotted one is the outgoing. So now you have your lead. So you have a lead on the right, a lead on the left, and then you put them together with the 3-bay. You put them together not with the 5, but with the 3-bay. Right? Lead 1, lead 2, and then your new lead that's going to end up going to the board. So they combine. That's what this number means. That's how many bays you have for this. And that's going to go straight into the board. Now, I don't need to show you an extensive diagram for the rest of these. However, I'm going to show you kind of an abbreviated one for how you would hook up the power. And the power I have marked in red. You should know, just like these right here, you have every single line coming from, or you have a line coming from every gauge into this Wago. I haven't shown in this diagram that a wire comes from here, goes in, a wire comes from here, goes in. It's just like this. The only thing that I'm showing you is the outbound to show you that here's a 5-bay, gauge 1, gauge 2, gauge 3, gauge 4, and the 5th line is your outbound. Same thing over here, just like we did the backlighting in orange. And then they combine here again for another 3, just like the one that we did for the backlight. And then this, essentially at this point, you can take this wire and go straight in, and take this wire and go straight in as well. But you will have 2 wires going into this. If that's a problem for you, what you can do, what I would recommend, because you now have 2 wires, both your red for power. Let me pull this out. Your red for power and your orange for, or yellow in some cases, for your backlight. Splice those together. And do that with another 3-bay. Red goes in, orange goes in, and then whatever color you want to come out, red or orange, and then that will go directly. That's that Wago clip, that 3-bay, and that will go directly into there. That's if you only want 1 wire to be going into that. And that is exactly what I did here. This is a red, and it's a single wire. And the way that I did that was I did it with one of these 3-bay clips. This was all of my backlighting for all of my gauges. This is all of my power right here for all of my gauges. And then this is the lead that eventually leads out to, because all this is doing is combining those wires and splicing them together. And it runs straight into there. 1 wire covers the power for all 8 gauges and the backlighting for all 8 gauges. That's kind of what this is explaining. And another abbreviated one for the ground wiring. Now, I didn't number these, but this is the same way. Just like you had 4 wires coming in, 1 going out for the backlighting and for the power, you also have 4 going in, 1 for each of them for the ground wire, 1 going out. The dotted line means going out. You're doing the same thing over here. They're combining. This is going to be a 3 up here. This is going to be a 3-bay because you've got wire 1, wire 2, and your outbound wire, and that's going to run straight into your ground. So that is how to use, that is the way that I am configuring all of my wires. I'm using those Wago clips, and I'm using the Pro Gauge board from Sim Projects. The last thing that I wanted to do, and it's a little bit easier if I get rid of all of these other ones first, is I'll show you the signal wire is probably the easiest because we've already covered the power to the backlight power, the power to the gauge. We've already covered the ground. Now all we have to do is deal with the signal wire. This is my speedometer. There's a special spot on the board that says speedometer. Only the speedometer goes there. Same thing with the tach. It's got a special spot. Only the tach goes there. Then it has 6 additional gauges. That's where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 will go. And that is the wire that is going to be communicating to your gauge to say, I know how far to move that gauge based on what's happening in the game. So this is probably the easiest part. The rest of it was figuring out how we were going to basically organize all of our wires, how we were going to put them together using these Wago clips, how to break them down from 4 lines to 1 line, or 4 to 2, and then eventually to 1 to go into the board. So let me know if you guys have any questions down below about that. So once you have everything plugged in, it's going into your board, your power, your ground, your backlight power, you've got your signal wires all going in. What happens if you have gauges that don't have the signal wire? Again, I kind of covered this a little bit, but you have to break into the gauge, take out their stepper motor, put in a stepper motor from Sim Projects, and have it tied with their proprietary cable, this ribbon cable. And it just so happens that on this particular gauge, there was already a hole here. It was actually to press it to change the different colors. A lot of the gauges now, they have this little button right here. It's kind of hard to see, but there you go. That button, and it makes it easier. But because this was the button to change the color, I just removed the rubber. It came out. It was just attaching, and it hits a piece of plastic down in here. That's the hole that I made so that my stepper motor from Sim Projects could come out to go into this X27 board. If you do this method using the X27, not only are you going to have to break into the gauge and replace the stepper motor, and please glue your new stepper motor in, otherwise it's a catastrophe. It's not going to work right. You're also, if you don't already have one of these, you're going to have to drill a small hole. Be very careful that you don't go into the processing board, which is about that far in. But so you can see it takes a lot more time, a little bit more of an issue, but you can fit up to 4 of them all at one time. And that is the stepper motor that comes with it. That's the other side of the stepper motor that's got that proprietary cable. And I wish they had a shorter cable. I really do. But at least they have a solution if your gauge is an electronic and you don't mind busting into the gauges to make that change. So now what do you do? At this point, you have all of your gauges working just fine. They're lit up and everything, but how do you calibrate them for the game? And on Sim Project's website, they do have a link to a piece of software where you can calibrate this, and the software is called SimDash. So if we come into SimDash over here, we see that, and these are the only 2 that I'm really messing with. One of them isn't showing right now because I don't have it plugged in. You can see I don't have this board plugged in right now. Normally it's plugged in, lit up, and you can see for the Pro Gauge board, it's usually right here. You see Pro Gauge. It's red because it's disconnected. If it is plugged in like the X27 one is, then you can go ahead. It'll say connected, and you can go in and hit configure. I'm going to connect the Pro Gauge again so I can show you how to configure these. Okay, as you can see, I have the USB cable plugged in. I have the power cable plugged in. And now, if I go and look at Pro Gauge, it's green, and I can go in and hit configure. Now with the Pro Gauge, you have your tachometer first. So I've already set my gauge. My gauge is, the RPM is set to go as high as 3,000. So you set that here to 3,000. You basically want to hit all these checkpoints. So you want to go and move the slider until you see the gauge stop at 90 RPMs. When it's there, you don't move this thing anymore. Then you move this slider until it gets to 150 RPMs, 300, 450, 1050. And you want to scroll down and you see how these sliders, we keep moving in progress. That's usually a good sign. All the way up until you get all the way to 3000. Once it's at 3000, you leave it, and now you can go back to any of these at any point. Boom, boom, boom. Just hit any of these buttons to verify, and it should go to exactly that value. Once that's good, you are calibrated. That's the RPM. If you have a speedometer that has a signal wire, you would do the same thing here. By the way, make sure that you hit enabled. I have this one disabled because I'm running my speedometer. I had to break into the gauge, replace the stepper motor. I'm running it with the X27. And I configure it more or less in the same fashion, where I'm running my test throughout the entire progress of the scale of the gauge. And I'm also setting a min and a max. Mine happens to go only to 80 miles per hour, which is what I wanted. It's pretty realistic for trucks. But essentially, you're just moving sliders till you get to the values, test them to verify, and you're pretty much good to go. Make sure they're enabled. And that's all built within the software that works with these Pro Gauge and X27 boards from Sim Projects. Some of the other gauges. This one I have is not online. There we go. This one I have is for my fuel pressure. So you would actually pick from the drop down here what kind of gauge it is. Do you have it in PSI, bar? That one? Oh my God, what is that? Kilopascals or something like that? Sorry, not on the metric system. My other gauge here is for oil pressure. I have a minimum and maximum value that I can read on the gauge. I insert those and label it as oil pressure, water temperature, oil temperature, fuel level, and like I said, I don't have the fuel pressure in there because while fuel pressure is something that can be read, fuel pressure is not outputted from American Truck Simulator, so I'm kind of screwed on that one. Don't make that mistake. But calibration is pretty easy. If you have any problems with calibration and you can't get the needle to work, look at all of this information on the Pro Gauge page, and it tells you what it's trying to do. It tells you whether you need to move over and use maybe an X27. It might be more smooth for you. Or it says it's got little jumper pins. And I'll show you what that looks like too. These are the jumper pins right here. You can move to different positions. And you can see I've actually moved one. It was set to here, and I moved it over to here. Can you see that? Yeah. So I moved the jumper wire. Basically, when you move the jumpers, it makes it a little bit more sensitive. And anyway, it's all right here on the page. It can tell you when to use it. And they even have, if you can't fit the entire range of the gauge because there's an issue with the signal, there's a signal adapter, and it shows you how to wire it too. So that's kind of a rundown on my setup. Boards, the gauges, a little bit intro into the wiring. I highly recommend getting these Wago clips, even if you're just testing. Look. Oh, wrong wire. Let me go ahead and pull it out. Done. Piece of cake. This is so easy for testing, but I'm probably going to leave them in just as is, actually, so I don't have to solder, which is kind of cool because I'm going to have this separate button box that I'm going to have as part of my dashboard just to the right. So just over here. And I've managed to put that board together and all of the buttons and everything. I still have to put the actual backing on here. But it's going to be done completely 100% without solder. Completely 100% without any coating. Same thing with all of these gauges. No soldering, thanks to these clips. And no coating because I'm using this Sim Projects board. And I showed you the software for calibration. Super easy. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off now because my throat is just about done. I still need a couple more days to get better. Sorry for having to put you through that. I've hopefully edited out most of the coughs. Thanks for your patience. If you have any questions, go ahead, drop them down in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give me the thumbs up. Consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you can see all of my videos, and I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.